Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to thank the Minister for his ongoing response to the questions that this side of the House has been putting. I think it's a good example to us of how Parliament should work and from time to time is known to work, and I'm hoping we can continue in that vein. This part, of course, is in respect of the provisions for the New Auckland Council to be able to borrow in foreign currencies. And we know that the government has another set of proposals around asset sales, and the proposition there is that mum and dad investors will be those who buy those assets. And I guess the question I wanted to put to the Minister is this: where is the capital likely to be coming from for the Auckland Council? If it is the case that it's able to borrow in foreign currency, is Treasury advising you and the Reserve Bank that is where the Auckland Council is likely to be making most of its borrowing from? Because if that is the case, ipso facto it would suggest that is the most likely market for other sources of investment. And I think we know that at the moment that the Chinese government, for one, is contributing a fair amount of the government's debt profile, and obviously in a situation where we are a debtor nation, we have to be grateful for whatever sources we can rely on for capital to come into. But I think New Zealanders will like some indication of where it's likely the Auckland Council is likely to be obtaining its capital from. The Minister indicated in the last part that the collective way that the rest of the funding agency works provides some sort of protection, an inherent protection. And I wanted to know how that relates to the Auckland Council in respect of any borrowing that it does offshore. Because although I think we know local government in this country is very broad and soundly based, it is not unknown for councils to get into trouble. I think of cities like Lille in Belgium, which many years ago went bankrupt after high borrowing, and also we are now seeing cities in North America where the rating values have just absolutely dropped as factories have moved offshore and the rating bases have just dropped to maybe 10 or 20% of what their value had been perhaps a decade ago, and it's caused enormous problems for some communities in North America. And we're not in that prospect, but I guess the House would like to know, in the spirit of cooperation we've been having, what is the likely debt profile that the Auckland City will be entering into? Where is the capital likely to be coming from? And I raise this concern too, while we are a debtor nation. The best thing that we can do is, where possible, create capital internally. There's quite a lot of effort going on at the moment to raise capital. I think of the University of Canterbury, which has been on the market quite recently to try and raise funds for its institution. Obviously, we have got a huge cost relating back to the debts coming out of the Christchurch quake. There's going to be a big demand upon capital, and where will Auckland be competing against in terms of the provision of that capital? Obviously, of course, we've seen just in the last week announcements from the EQC where effectively its coffers have run dry in respect of any further major natural disaster. That will be putting pressure upon debt programs, and it is a difficult time for us as a nation in respect of borrowing when we have those various pressures upon us. Now, Auckland obviously has a huge infrastructure demand that needs to develop and grow. Hopefully a lot of the funding that it will be raising through the Part 2 of this bill will be towards public transport programs to assist Auckland to be a viable and sustainable city into the future, rather than endless building of motorways with all of the climate change implications that they bring. But I'd like just the Minister to comment briefly upon what is the likely source of capital that the Auckland Council will be likely to attract. Where is it going to be coming from? And I guess the final comment I'd make in respect of this is that every dollar that we do borrow offshore, and we need to borrow many, carries with it an additional cost. We will see the Reserve Bank Governor next week announcing his latest position on interest rates. The signals are the market will hold, but at some point interest rates will rise. And every time we import capital and it repatriates capital back out, it keeps our interest rates high and our dollar high as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, it would be inappropriate for me, Mr. Burns, to suggest what the debt profile could be or should be or would be for a particular council or the funding agency. But let me just explain the Auckland situation. What we've done is take 4 large councils and combine them in 3 other councils, or 8 councils actually, into one. And so the situation is that the New Zealand capital market couldn't actually fund the debt of that new council, so they needed to be in a position, whether you had this funding agency or not, to be able to go offshore. Secondly, because it is such a large council, if it could only borrow offshore through the funding agency would be unduly exposed to one council, and so we actually had to provide for both mechanisms. It was always the intention from day one, once we got an understanding of the debt requirements of the New Auckland Council, to allow it to borrow offshore. But we were very pleased that the Council and then Mayor Len Brown committed to the funding agency, because it actually helps the whole system to hold. And in fact, it was one of the issues that we needed to address in setting the funding agency up. They would have sufficient support. And in fact, let me acknowledge the New Auckland Council and indeed Mayor Len Brown for their commitment to local government New Zealand through New Zealand. So they understand, while they're a very large council and they could so much go out on their own, it would be counterproductive to Auckland and counterproductive to New Zealand if they basically said, well, to heck with the other councils, we'll just do our thing. And so they've been very committed to being an active participant, for example, in local government New Zealand, so the smaller councils don't get left behind, and indeed to committing to the funding agency. And we certainly appreciate that, I think, as Aucklanders and as New Zealanders.
Phil Twyford.